It was a bitter evening in Boston, the kind that turned breath into visible clouds and numbed fingers within minutes. The sidewalks of Tremont Street glistened with fresh snow trampled into slush by the steady stream of elegantly dressed patrons, heading to the Wang Theatre. Outside the historic venue, a crowd had gathered despite the freezing temperatures, held captive by the allure of celebrity sightings at the charity gala benefiting children's arts education. Among the onlookers stood Zoe, a thin 16-year-old with hollow cheeks and intelligent eyes that seemed too old for such a young face. A tattered blue parka hung from her narrow shoulders, its zipper broken and replaced with carefully arranged safety pins to keep out the biting cold. Worn sneakers, soaked through from the snow, completed the picture of quiet desperation that nobody in the excited crowd seemed to notice. Zoe's hands trembled, partly from cold but mostly from nervousness. The carefully written note in her pocket represented a level of boldness that made her heart race. The plan, formulated through sleepless nights in the back seat of her grandmother's aging Corolla, now seemed impossibly daunting. Their descent into homelessness had been swift and merciless. 4 months ago they had a modest apartment, her grandmother's pension, and the security that came with knowing where you'd sleep each night. Then came Grandma Eliza's heart attack, the mounting medical bills, and finally the eviction notice. That had changed everything. Now home was a car parked in different lots each night, and dinner was whatever could be purchased from the dollar menu to be divided between them. "Look, the cars are arriving." Someone in the crowd called out, excitement rippling through the gathered fans as black SUVs began pulling up to the theater entrance. Zoe pushed forward slightly, heart hammering against her ribs. Each vehicle disgorged its cargo of glittering celebrities, their smiles bright under the camera flashes, their outfits perfectly tailored against the winter chill. "That's Emma Thompson," someone whispered excitedly nearby. "And look, Stanley Tucci just behind her," another voice added. Zoe paid them little attention, scanning each arriving face with increasing urgency. The STEM program application sat folded in her other pocket, a cruel reminder of what $500 could provide, a chance at a future, a potential scholarship, perhaps even a path to college that had seemed impossible since their lives had unraveled. They'd scraped together $137 from pawning her grandmother's wedding ring, the last thing of value they owned, but it wasn't enough. The application deadline was tomorrow, and the program required specialized materials and fees that might as well have been $1 million for all their ability to afford them. A fresh wave of whispers announced another arrival, and Zoe's breath caught. There she was, Meryl Streep, elegant in a long charcoal coat, her silver hair styled perfectly, her smile gracious as she waved to fans. Unlike some who rushed past the crowd, Meryl moved unhurriedly, occasionally stopping to sign an autograph or exchange a word with an admirer. This was the moment. Zoe had chosen Meryl specifically, having read countless articles about her philanthropy and kindness. If anyone might listen, might help, it would be her. With a deep breath that felt like inhaling courage itself, Zoe pushed through the last row of onlookers and stepped into the cleared path where security created a corridor for the celebrities. Immediately, a burly security guard moved to intercept, but Zoe was quick, darting past him and directly into Meryl's path. "Ms. Streep," Zoe called, voice cracking slightly from both cold and fear. "Please." Meryl paused, her security detail immediately tensing and moving closer. The crowd quieted, all eyes suddenly on this unexpected interruption to the carefully choreographed, "Evening, I'm sorry, but I need to ask you something," Zoe continued, words tumbling out quickly before courage could evaporate. "I need $500. It's for a STEM program application. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." The security guard reached for Zoe's shoulder, but Meryl raised her hand slightly, stopping him. For a moment, she said nothing, her expression unreadable. As she studied the young face before her, the crowd seemed to hold its collective breath. "Please," Zoe repeated softer now, shame coloring her pale cheeks. "I'll pay you back someday. I promise." What happened next would be discussed in hushed, reverent tones across social media platforms for weeks to come. Instead of calling for security or simply handing over money to make the uncomfortable moment pass, Meryl Streep did something entirely unexpected. She removed her gloves slowly, deliberately, her eyes never leaving Zoe's face. Then she stepped closer, reducing the distance between Hollywood royalty and desperate teenager to mere inches. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice gentle but clear enough to carry to the now silent crowd. "Zoe," came the whispered reply. "And you need this money for a STEM program?" Zoe nodded, throat suddenly too tight for words. She pulled the crumpled application from her pocket, hands shaking as she offered it to the actress. Meryl glanced briefly at the paper, then back to Zoe. "Where do you live, Zoe?" The question wasn't dismissive, but filled with genuine concern. Behind Meryl, unnoticed by Zoe, Emma Thompson had emerged from another vehicle, her attention immediately caught by the unfolding scene. She moved closer, exchanging a glance with Meryl that communicated volumes without words. We live in our car," Zoe finally managed, eyes downcast. "My grandmother and me, 3 blocks from here. She doesn't know I'm here. She'd be really angry if she knew I was asking for money." A collective murmur passed through the crowd as the implication of those words registered. Not just a teenager asking for money, but a homeless family living in their car in the depths of a Boston winter. The security team shifted uncomfortably, clearly uncertain how to proceed with this deviation from protocol. Cameras flashed more intensely, capturing the moment when glamour and desperation collided on a snowy Boston sidewalk. Meryl's response would transform not just one night, but the entire trajectory of 2 lives, as she opened her mouth to reply. No one present could have predicted the extraordinary chain of events her words would set in motion, or how a desperate request on a freezing evening would become the catalyst for a story of compassion that would warm hearts across the nation. The crowd held its collective breath as Meryl Streep stood face to face with Zoe, the desperate request for $500 hanging in the frosty air between them. Photographers jostled for position, sensing a moment worth capturing. Zoe's request had cut through the glamour of the evening like a knife, exposing a parallel reality that existed just blocks away from the glittering gala. $500 for a STEM program, Meryl repeated thoughtfully, her eyes never leaving Zoe's face. She didn't reach for her purse as everyone expected. Instead, she did something that left onlookers stunned. She gently placed her hand on Zoe's shoulder and said, "I think we need to talk about more than just money, don't you?" Zoe blinked in confusion, having prepared for either a kind rejection or at best the requested cash. This response fell into neither category. She stood frozen in place, acutely aware of the crowd's eyes upon her, the flashing cameras, and the weight of Meryl Streep's hand still resting gently on her shoulder. Emma Thompson, who had been watching the interaction with interest, stepped forward to join them. "Meryl, is everything all right?" she asked, her British accent crisp in the cold air. "Emma, this is Zoe," Meryl replied, making the introduction as naturally as if they were at a dinner party rather than on a snowy sidewalk surrounded by paparazzi. "Zoe and her grandmother need some assistance, and it seems more complex than just a program fee." Emma's expression softened immediately, her eyes reflecting the same concern now evident in Meryl's face. Without hesitation, she joined the small circle, creating a buffer between Zoe and the curious crowd. "Well then," Emma said with characteristic directness, "I believe our first order of business should be getting somewhere warm to sort this out properly." Zoe stood stunned, unable to process this turn of events. The plan had been simple. Ask for money, hopefully receive it, rush back to the car where Grandma Eliza waited unaware of her granddaughter's desperate gambit. Now 2 of Hollywood's most respected actresses were suggesting, what exactly? Meryl turned to her assistant, a poised woman in her 30s who had materialized at her side. "Rebecca, please tell Martin we'll be missing the first portion of the gala. This is more important." She then looked back at Zoe with gentle eyes. "Would it be all right if we spoke with your grandmother as well? I think we might be able to help, but I'd like to understand your situation better." Zoe hesitated, her mind racing. Grandma would be mortified. She'd raised Zoe to be self-sufficient, proud never to beg. But they'd been living in that car for almost 4 months now. Grandma's heart medication was running low, winter was deepening, and now, impossibly, help was being offered. She might be asleep, Zoe stammered. She gets tired easily since her heart attack. We'll be gentle, Emma assured her. And if she's not up for talking, we can arrange things through you. Meryl's security detail, now understanding this wasn't a security threat but a humanitarian situation, quickly reorganized, creating a protective formation around the unlikely trio. Rebecca was already on her phone, making arrangements in hushed, urgent tones. "I don't understand," Zoe said, her voice barely audible. "Why would you do this? You don't even know me." Meryl's smile was warm as security began guiding them toward a side entrance of the theater, away from the main crowd. Sometimes the universe puts people in each other's paths for a reason. Let's just say I recognize the look of someone who needs help, but would rather not ask for it. Within minutes, Zoe found herself in a private room off the main lobby, its elegant furnishings a stark contrast to the back seat of the Corolla where she'd been sleeping. The warmth enveloped her painfully, highlighting how deeply the cold had settled into her bones over the past months. "When did you last eat, Zoe?" Emma asked, studying the girl's thin frame with concern. The question caught Zoe off guard. "This morning," she replied, then added honestly, "just some crackers, we're stretching our food budget." Emma nodded, exchanging a meaningful glance with Meryl. "Food first, then," she declared. Rebecca returned with news that a car was being arranged and a quiet restaurant nearby had been called. "They'll have a private room ready in 15 minutes, she reported efficiently. "I really should get back to my grandmother," Zoe protested weakly, though the thought of food made her empty. Stomach twist painfully. "She'll worry if she wakes up and I'm not there." "We'll call her," Meryl suggested, then paused as Zoe's expression fell. "You don't have phones?" "We had to cancel the service," Zoe admitted. "Just kept one for emergencies, but it has no minutes." Left. Another layer of understanding passed between the two actresses. "Then we'll go to her," Emma decided. "Together, after we get you something to eat." "One moment," Meryl said, stepping aside with Rebecca for a brief conversation. When she returned, her expression was determined. "Rebecca will get your grandmother and bring her to join us. That way you can eat while we wait and she won't be worried. Where exactly is your car parked?" Zoe hesitated only briefly before giving the location, a side street near the public library, chosen for its relative safety and proximity to the building's exterior heating vents. Rebecca nodded and immediately departed on her mission. Left. Alone with the two actresses, Zoe felt suddenly self-conscious of her worn clothes, unwashed hair, and the fatigue that had become her constant companion. "I'm sorry to ruin your evening," she said quietly. The gala seemed important. "There will be other galas," Emma replied with a dismissive wave of her hand. "What matters more," Meryl added, "is that you had the courage to speak up tonight. Many wouldn't." A quiet knock announced the arrival of food. Someone had thought to order sandwiches and hot soup while waiting for the restaurant arrangements. Zoe stared at the simple meal as though it were a feast. "Please," Meryl encouraged, "eat while it's hot." Zoe didn't need to be told twice. She ate carefully at first, then with increasing hunger as her body remembered what it felt like to have a proper meal. Between bites, the story emerged in fragments. Her parents' death in a car accident when she was 8, her grandmother becoming her sole guardian, their modest but stable life until Eliza's heart attack 4 months ago. "The medical bills came first," Zoe explained, cradling the warm soup bowl. "Then Grandma couldn't go back to her cashier job. The eviction notice came right after Thanksgiving." "And school?" Emma inquired gently. "I've kept attending. The school doesn't know we're—" Zoe trailed off, unable to say the word homeless aloud. "I use the library bathrooms to clean up. My grades are still good. That's why this STEM program matters so much. It could lead to a scholarship." Meryl listened, intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but never interrupting Zoe's flow. Her eyes reflected not pity, but genuine concern and growing respect for the teenager's resilience. As Zoe finished eating, Rebecca returned, her expression composed, but her eyes betraying surprise at what she'd found. "Ms. Streep, I've brought—" "Zoe's grandmother as requested. She's waiting in the car outside. She was quite surprised to see me." "I imagine so," Meryl replied with a small smile. She turned to Zoe. "Are you ready to introduce us? I promise we'll approach this with complete respect for your grandmother's dignity." Zoe nodded, gathering her courage once more. As they moved toward the exit, she realized that what had begun as a desperate plea for $500 had somehow transformed into something much larger, something that felt, impossibly, like hope. The black SUV sat idling at the curb, its tinted windows concealing the occupant inside. As Meryl, Emma, and Zoe approached, flanked discreetly by security, Zoe's steps became increasingly hesitant. Meeting her childhood idol had required courage. Facing her grandmother after this unauthorized plea for help would require something else entirely. "She's going to be so angry with me," Zoe whispered, stopping a few feet from the vehicle. Meryl placed a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. "Let me speak first, if you're comfortable with that. Sometimes it's easier to accept help when it comes as a surprise rather than something sought out." Zoe nodded gratefully as Rebecca opened the car door. Inside sat Eliza Morgan, a dignified woman in her late 60s, whose once robust frame had withered during her illness. Despite the circumstances, she sat straight-backed, her silver hair pulled into a neat bun, wearing a clean but visibly worn sweater. Her eyes, the same deep brown as her granddaughter's, widened in recognition of the famous faces before narrowing in confusion. "Ms. Morgan," Meryl began, her voice warm and respectful, "I'm Meryl Streep. Your granddaughter approached me this evening with remarkable courage. I hope you'll forgive this unexpected intrusion, but we wanted to speak with you directly." Eliza's gaze shifted to her granddaughter, a complex mixture of emotions crossing her face. "Zoe, what have you done?" The question held more weariness than anger. Before Zoe could respond, Emma stepped forward. "What she's done, Ms. Morgan, is show extraordinary resourcefulness in a situation where most adults would have crumbled. May we join you? It's rather cold out here." Something in Emma's forthright manner seemed to resonate with Eliza. She nodded slowly, moving over to make room. Zoe slid in beside her grandmother, while Meryl and Emma entered from the opposite side. Rebecca remained outside with security, ensuring their privacy. "I specifically told you not to ask strangers for money," Eliza said to Zoe, her voice low but firm. "Grandma, the STEM program deadline is tomorrow. We needed the fee." Zoe's voice trembled slightly. "I had to try something." Eliza closed her eyes briefly, the weight of their circumstances visible in the tight lines around her mouth. When she opened them again, she addressed the actresses directly. "I apologize for my granddaughter's imposition. We're going through a difficult time, but that's no excuse for—" "There's no need for apologies," Meryl interrupted gently. "Sometimes pride needs to take a back seat to practicality, especially when a young person's future is at stake." Emma nodded in agreement. "Ms. Morgan, would you be willing to tell us how you and Zoe came to be in this situation? Understanding the full picture would help us determine the most appropriate assistance." Eliza hesitated, decades of self-reliance, warring with their desperate reality. "It's not a very dignified story. Dignity isn't determined by circumstances," Meryl observed quietly. "From where I'm sitting, I see plenty of it in this car." Something in Eliza's expression softened. With a deep breath, she began their story. In earnest, her voice steady despite the painful details. She had raised Zoe since the child was 8, after her daughter and son-in-law died in a car accident. They'd lived modestly but comfortably on Eliza's savings and her job as a department store manager. Then came the first heart attack 11 months ago. Medical bills mounted despite Medicare. Eliza had returned to work too soon, against doctors' orders, triggering a second, more severe attack 4 months ago. "That's when everything fell apart," Eliza explained. "Short-term disability ran out. I couldn't work. The landlord was patient for a while, but eventually—" She gestured to the car's interior, which Zoe had kept meticulously clean, their few remaining possessions carefully organized in the trunk and back seat. "And your medical care now?" Emma asked with gentle directness. "Community clinic when absolutely necessary," Eliza answered. "My prescriptions." She trailed off, then admitted, "I've been taking half doses to stretch them. It's not ideal." Zoe, who had been quiet during her grandmother's recounting, spoke up. "She needs proper medication. The clinic doctor said her heart could get worse without it. That's more important than any program fee. Meryl and Emma exchanged a glance, loaded with shared understanding. Then Meryl turned to Rebecca, who had been waiting discreetly outside. After a brief conversation through the window, Rebecca nodded and stepped away to make calls. "Ms. Morgan," Meryl said, turning back to Eliza, "here's what I propose. First, proper accommodation tonight, a hotel suite where you both can rest comfortably. Second, an appointment with a cardiologist tomorrow to review your medication needs. Third, we ensure Zoe's application fee is handled before tomorrow's deadline." Emma added, "And then, when you've had a chance to rest, we can discuss longer-term solutions." Eliza's expression tightened again. "I appreciate your kindness, but charity—" "Call it an investment," Emma interrupted briskly. "In Zoe's future, in yours, in what you both might contribute to the world when you're back on your feet." Meryl nodded in agreement. "Everyone needs help sometimes, Miss Morgan. I certainly have at various points in my life." "Really?" Zoe couldn't help asking, her academic curiosity momentarily overcoming her anxiety. "Absolutely," Meryl confirmed. "My early career was filled with moments when I needed others to believe in me, to give me opportunities I couldn't create for myself. That's all we're offering here. An opportunity, not an endpoint." Rebecca returned to the window. "The Wellington Hotel has a 2-bedroom suite available immediately. Dr. Patel can see Ms. Morgan at 9 a.m. tomorrow at Massachusetts General. The STEM program coordinator has been contacted and confirmed they'll hold Zoe's spot while the registration fee is processed." Eliza looked overwhelmed by the swift efficiency with which her most immediate problems were being addressed. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Say you'll accept," Emma suggested simply. "Not just for yourself, but for Zoe." Eliza looked at her granddaughter, seeing the hope that had begun to flicker in her eyes after months of careful stoicism. With a deep breath that seemed to release years of strain, she nodded. "Thank you," she said quietly. "We accept your help." The relief on Zoe's face was palpable. She reached for her grandmother's hand, squeezing it gently. "Excellent," Meryl said warmly. "Shall we head to the hotel? I think we could all use a cup of tea and continue our conversation somewhere more comfortable." As they drove through Boston's illuminated streets, Zoe gazed out the window, the familiar buildings taking on a different aspect now that tonight wouldn't be spent huddled in a cold car, strategically parked to avoid police attention. Next to her, Eliza sat with quiet dignity, her expression thoughtful as she processed the unexpected turn their evening had taken. In the facing seats, Meryl and Emma spoke quietly with Rebecca about practical arrangements, careful to include their new companions in decisions rather than simply taking over. The distinction wasn't lost on Eliza, whose posture gradually relaxed as she realized these women intended to help without diminishing her autonomy or dignity. For the first time in months, both grandmother and granddaughter allowed themselves to consider the possibility that tomorrow might hold something beyond mere survival, perhaps even the beginning of a new chapter in their story. The Wellington Hotel stood elegant and imposing against the night sky, its golden lobby lights spilling onto the snow-covered sidewalk. Rather than entering through the grand front entrance, Rebecca guided their small group through a discreet service corridor, a thoughtful consideration that spared Eliza and Zoe the curious stares their current appearance might attract in the opulent lobby. The hotel manager himself met them at the service elevator, his professional demeanor betraying only the slightest flicker of recognition when faced with two Hollywood legends. "The ambassador suite is ready, Ms. Streep. 2 bedrooms, fully stocked kitchen, and the additional items you requested have been delivered." "Thank you, Richard," Meryl replied warmly. "And thank you for the discretion." As the elevator ascended smoothly to the 12th floor, Zoe felt almost dizzy with the surreal quality of the evening. 4 hours ago, she had been gathering her courage outside the theater, rehearsing her desperate request. Now she stood beside her grandmother in a private elevator, accompanied by Meryl Streep and Emma Thompson, ascending to a hotel suite she could never have imagined entering. When the doors opened directly into the suite, both Zoe and Eliza audibly gasped. The spacious living area featured plush sofas, a dining table with fresh flowers, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the twinkling Boston skyline. 2 bedroom doors stood open, revealing king-sized beds with crisp white linens. A small kitchenette gleamed with stainless steel appliances, already stocked with food. "This is—" Eliza trailed off, clearly overwhelmed. "Perfect for tonight," Emma completed for her, echoing the same words she'd used in the car. "The hotel has extended the reservation for 3 nights to start, giving us time to figure out next steps." Zoe wandered toward the windows, drawn by the panoramic view of the city that had become increasingly hostile to their survival over the winter months. From this height, Boston looked magical rather than menacing. The streets where they'd searched for safe parking spots transformed into glittering arteries of light. "There are fresh clothes in both bedrooms," Rebecca explained, gesturing to shopping bags visible on the beds. "Basic necessities, pajamas, and a few outfits. I estimated sizes, but we can adjust tomorrow if needed." Eliza's hands trembled slightly as she lowered herself onto one of the sofas. "This is too much," she said quietly. Meryl sat beside her, close but not crowding. "It's exactly enough," she countered gently. "You and Zoe deserve a safe, warm place to sleep, proper meals, and medical care. These aren't luxuries, Miss Morgan. They're basic necessities that circumstances have temporarily placed out of reach. Please call me Eliza," she replied, a small but significant lowering of formal barriers. Emma, meanwhile, had moved to the kitchenette with Zoe. "Let's see what they've stocked for us," she suggested, opening the refrigerator. "Are you still hungry? We could make sandwiches." Zoe nodded, her earlier meal having awakened rather than satisfied her hunger after months of deprivation. As they assembled simple sandwiches, Emma kept the conversation light, asking about Zoe's academic interests and future aspirations rather than dwelling on their current hardships. "Biomedical engineering," Zoe explained, animation entering her voice as she described her career dreams. "I want to design medical devices, especially cardiac monitoring systems. After Grandma's heart attacks, I started researching everything about cardiology." "Remarkable," Emma commented, genuinely impressed, turning a personal challenge into professional purpose. While they prepared food, Rebecca sat with Meryl and Eliza, reviewing the doctor's appointment details for the morning and explaining how Zoe's STEM program application had been handled. The program coordinator was quite impressed with Zoe's preliminary submission, Rebecca noted. She mentioned they rarely see such sophisticated work from applicants her age. Pride briefly overcame Eliza's exhaustion. "Zoe's always been exceptional academically, even with everything," she gestured vaguely, encompassing their recent hardships. "She never stopped studying, never complained." "Children often rise to meet challenges we never wished for them to face," Meryl observed. "The resilience is admirable, though they shouldn't have to develop it so young." When the sandwiches were ready, the unlikely group gathered around the dining table. For a moment, no one spoke, the simple act of sharing food together creating a bridge between their vastly different worlds. Then Emma raised her water glass. "To new beginnings," she offered. "And unexpected friendships," Meryl added. After they Rebecca departed with promises to return in the morning for Eliza's doctor appointment. Meryl and Emma prepared to leave as well, sensitive to the fact that their new acquaintances needed rest more than continued conversation. "We'll meet tomorrow afternoon after your medical appointment," Meryl explained. "Take the morning to rest. Use the hotel amenities. There's a laundry service if you'd like to wash your clothes from the car. And don't worry about checkout," Emma added. "Everything's arranged through the week." Zoe walked them to the door, suddenly reluctant to see them leave, as though their departure might break the spell of safety that had enveloped them. "Thank you," she said, the simple words inadequate for the emotions behind them. "Not just for the money or the hotel, but for listening, for treating us like people who matter." "You do matter," Meryl replied with quiet intensity. "Both of you." She handed Zoe a card with her personal number written on the back. "If you need anything before tomorrow, anything at all, call this number directly." After they left, Zoe returned, to find her grandmother standing in the doorway of one of the bedrooms, tears streaming silently down her face. "Grandma?" Zoe rushed to her side, alarmed. "Are you feeling okay? Is it your heart?" Eliza shook her head, wiping her cheeks with trembling fingers. "I'm just overwhelmed, sweetheart. Look, She gestured into the bedroom where the neatly arranged shopping bags waited. Beside them on the nightstand sat a small basket containing Eliza's exact heart medication, not just a single prescription but a 3-month supply. Rebecca must have called it in while we were talking in the car. Zoe helped her grandmother to sit on the edge of the bed, the simple softness of the mattress causing both of them to pause in appreciation after months of sleeping upright in car seats. "I didn't think we'd ever sleep in real beds again," Eliza admitted, her voice small. "I've failed you so terribly, Zoe." "No," Zoe said fiercely, kneeling before her grandmother. "You've never failed me. We've been surviving together. But now maybe we can do more than just survive." After Eliza took her full dose of medication for the first time in months, Zoe helped her grandmother shower in the luxurious bathroom. The simple act of washing away months of makeshift cleanliness in public restrooms felt like a ceremony, water carrying away not just dirt, but layers of shame and desperation. Later, dressed in new soft pajamas, they sat together on the sofa, gazing out at the city lights, neither quite ready to separate into individual bedrooms after months of constant proximity in the car. "What happens tomorrow?" Eliza asked softly. "And the day after? We can't stay in a hotel forever." Zoe leaned against her grandmother's shoulder. "I don't know exactly, but I think they genuinely want to help us find something stable, not just temporary." She paused, then added with newfound conviction, "And I believe them." Outside their window, snow began to fall again, but for the first time in months, its beauty registered without the accompanying dread of another freezing night. In the car, inside wrapped in warmth and unexpected kindness, grandmother and granddaughter allowed themselves to sleep deeply, safely, the first step in a journey neither could yet fully imagine. 1 week had passed since the night outside the Wang Theatre. Zoe sat cross-legged on the hotel suite sofa, her laptop open before her, hair still damp from a morning shower. The transformation in her appearance was subtle but significant. Her hollow cheeks had begun to fill out, dark circles lightening beneath her eyes. The constant vigilance of homelessness had started to fade from her posture. "It's official," she called out, excitement bubbling in her voice. "I got the email confirmation. I'm accepted into the STEM program." Eliza emerged from her bedroom, fastening a simple silver earring. She too looked markedly better after a week of proper meals, medication and uninterrupted sleep. Her silver hair was neatly styled, and she wore one of the classic outfits Rebecca had thoughtfully selected, clothes that reflected her natural dignity rather than drawing attention to their circumstances. "That's wonderful news, sweetheart." Eliza crossed the room to study the acceptance letter on Zoe's screen. "When does it start?" "Next Monday. The engineering lab sessions are twice weekly after school, and there's a Saturday seminar every other weekend." Zoe scrolled through the details, her excitement momentarily dimming. "We'll need to figure out transportation." "One step at a time," Eliza reminded her, the phrase having become something of a mantra during this week of rapid changes. A gentle knock announced Rebecca's arrival. Unlike their first days when she'd appeared with various necessities and arrangements, her visits had evolved into a comfortable rhythm of check-ins and updates. "Good morning," she greeted them warmly. "I hear congratulations are in order." Zoe nodded eagerly. "I just got the acceptance email." "Perfect timing," Rebecca replied, setting her tablet on the coffee table. "Meryl and Emma will be here in 30 minutes and they'll be thrilled to hear the news." Over the past week, the actresses had maintained contact despite their busy schedules, Meryl calling daily, Emma stopping by twice with books she thought Zoe might enjoy. Their involvement had been careful, neither intrusive nor distant, allowing the grandmother and granddaughter space to adjust while ensuring they didn't feel abandoned. "How was your follow-up appointment, Eliza?" Rebecca asked, turning to the older woman. "Encouraging," Eliza replied. "Dr. Patel says my heart function is already showing improvement with the proper medication regimen. She believes I might be able to consider part-time work within a month, as long as it's not physically demanding." Rebecca made a note on her tablet. "That's excellent news. I've been compiling some employment possibilities we can discuss today." When Meryl and Emma arrived precisely on schedule, They brought not only their warm presence, but also a woman Zoe and Eliza hadn't met before. A professional-looking African-American woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "This is Diane Taylor," Meryl introduced after warm greetings were exchanged. "She's a social worker who specializes in housing stability and family transitions." "I also have experience with medical crisis intervention," Diane added, shaking hands with both Zoe and Eliza. "I'm not here as part of any government agency. I work with Meryl's foundation on special cases." "Our situation is special?" Eliza asked, a hint of her old wariness returning. "Every situation is special," Diane replied without missing a beat, "but yours has particular elements, medical needs, educational opportunities, and housing insecurity that benefit from a coordinated approach rather than piecemeal solutions." As they settled around the suite's dining table, Emma noticed Zoe's open laptop. "Is that good news I spy on your screen?" Zoe's smile returned full force. "I got accepted to the STEM program." "Wonderful," Emma exclaimed, while Meryl nodded with evident satisfaction. "That's our first bit of foundation building," Meryl noted, turning to Diane. "Education security." Diane nodded, opening her portfolio. "Which brings us nicely to our agenda today. We need to establish 3 foundations: housing stability, health maintenance, and financial sustainability." Over the next hour, Diane laid out options with methodical clarity, presenting choices rather than directives. For housing, she presented 3 apartment possibilities, all within reasonable distance of Zoe's school, all available for immediate occupancy with a 1-year lease. "The foundation will cover security deposit and first 3 months' rent," Meryl explained. "That provides breathing room while Eliza's health continues to improve and employment options develop." Eliza studied the apartment options with careful attention. "These seem remarkably affordable. They're part of a workforce housing initiative," Diane explained. "Not subsidized housing with its restrictions and wait lists, but units specifically intended for working families recovering from setbacks. The building owners partner with our foundation. For healthcare, Dr. Patel had already arranged Eliza's enrollment in a cardiac monitoring program that would provide ongoing care beyond the immediate crisis. And for Zoe," Emma added, "we've arranged a comprehensive health checkup next week. Just routine preventative care that may have been deferred during these difficult months." The financial sustainability plan proved most complex, balancing immediate needs with long-term independence. A modest stipend would bridge the gap until Eliza could work again, paired with financial counseling to manage their transition. "I don't want to become dependent," Eliza stated firmly, her dignity evident in her straight posture and direct gaze. "This isn't about creating dependency," Diane assured her. "It's about creating stability. Think of it as rehabilitation after an injury, temporary supports removed gradually as strength returns." As Diane outlined the plan's details, Zoe found herself studying the interactions between the women surrounding her. There was no power imbalance in their discussion, no sense of patronizing charity. Instead, she observed mutual respect, Diane's professional expertise, Eliza's personal autonomy, Meryl and Emma's resources, all aligned toward sustainable solutions. "There's one more thing," Rebecca interjected, once the major topics had been addressed. "The Science Center at the Museum of Technology has an opening for a part-time student docent. Given Zoe's STEM focus and academic record, they're interested in interviewing her." Zoe's eyes widened. "A job at the Science Center? But I'm only 16. "Their youth docent program begins at 16, Rebecca explained. "It's 10 hours weekly, primarily weekends, and counts as both employment and educational experience for college applications. I've arranged an interview for you tomorrow at 2 p.m. if you're interested," Meryl added. "No pressure, of course. The timing might be challenging with the STEM program starting." "I can manage both," Zoe said quickly, her mind already calculating schedules and opportunities. "I want to contribute to our expenses." Eliza reached for her granddaughter's hand, squeezing it gently, always thinking of us as a team. When the meeting concluded, Diane remained to help Eliza with housing paperwork, while Meryl and Emma stepped onto the suite's small balcony with Zoe. The Boston skyline stretched before them, the same city that had seemed so hostile during their months of homelessness now appearing full of possibilities. "How are you really doing?" Emma asked, her perceptive gaze catching the moments when Zoe's enthusiasm briefly faltered. "Sometimes I'm afraid to believe this is real," Zoe admitted. "That I'll wake up back in the car." Meryl nodded in understanding. Trauma creates that fear, the waiting for the other shoe to drop. "But this is real," Emma assured her. "The apartment, the STEM program, the doctor's care for your grandmother, these aren't things that disappear overnight." "Why us?" Zoe asked suddenly, the question that had lingered beneath the surface all week finally emerging. "Thousands of people are homeless. Why did you help us so completely?" Meryl considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Perhaps because you weren't asking for a handout, but for opportunity. Your STEM program application showed you were building towards something despite overwhelming obstacles. That kind of determination deserves support. And sometimes," Emma added thoughtfully, "the most effective change happens person to person, story to story. We can't solve homelessness broadly, but we can absolutely help Zoe and Eliza Morgan find stability again." As they rejoined the others inside, Zoe noticed Eliza smiling as she signed the lease application for the Queen's Park apartment, the smallest of the three options, but the one closest to Zoe's school. It was the smile of someone beginning to believe in possibility again after months of mere survival. Later, as they packed the few belongings they'd accumulated during their hotel stay, preparing for the apartment viewing scheduled for the following day, Zoe realized something profound had shifted within her. Beyond the material assistance, beyond even the opportunities suddenly opening before her, the most significant change was internal, the rekindling of hope, the permission to plan beyond the next meal or the next night's shelter. The foundations being laid weren't just of housing, or healthcare or education. They were foundations of a future that had seemed lost forever in the moment their eviction notice arrived 4 months ago. 1 month had passed since the fateful night outside the Wang Theatre. The modest 2-bedroom apartment in the Queen's Park complex had transformed from an empty shell into something that was beginning to feel like home. Though sparsely furnished with essentials from a discount furniture store, small touches had begun to appear. A potted plant on the kitchen windowsill, framed photographs rescued from storage, Zoe's STEM program schedule magneted to the refrigerator. Daughter Eliza stood at the stove, stirring a pot of homemade soup. The simple act of cooking in her own kitchen again had become a daily pleasure she never took for granted. Her movements were more energetic than they had been in months, the proper medication regimen having stabilized her condition significantly. "Something smells amazing," Zoe remarked, dropping her backpack by the door. Her cheeks were flushed from the brisk April air, her eyes bright with the excitement that had become her default expression since starting both the STEM program and her docent position at the Science Center. "Vegetable barley," Eliza replied with a smile. "How was school?" "Good. Great, actually." Zoe pulled a folded paper from her pocket. "Ms. Chen wants to submit my cardiac monitoring prototype design to the state science competition. She says it has commercial potential." Eliza wiped her hands on a dish towel and took the design schematic from her granddaughter. Though the technical aspects exceeded her understanding, the precision of the drawings and the thoughtful annotations were impressive even to her untrained eye. "This is remarkable, Zoe." Pride colored her voice. "Your parents would be so proud to see what you're creating." The mention of Zoe's parents, once a topic too painful to broach during their hardest months, had gradually become possible again, part of their healing process. "I was thinking about Dad while working on it," Zoe admitted. "How he always said engineering was about solving real problems, not theoretical ones." Their conversation was interrupted by a gentle knock. Meryl Streep stood at their open door, her smile warm as she took in the domestic scene before her. "I hope I'm not interrupting dinner," she said, holding a gift bag in one hand and a slim portfolio in the other. "Not at all," Eliza welcomed her. "Please join us. It's just soup and bread, but there's plenty." The easy hospitality would have been unimaginable a month ago, when accepting help had felt like surrendering dignity. Now a more balanced relationship had evolved, not quite friendship between equals given the vast differences in their circumstances, but a genuine connection built on mutual respect. Meryl settled at their small dining table, accepting a mug of tea. "The apartment looks wonderful," she observed. "You've made it your own already." "It feels like home," Eliza confirmed. "The foundation program has been transformative." While Eliza finished preparing dinner, Meryl turned to Zoe. "I brought someone I'd like you to meet tomorrow if you're available. Dr. Eleanor Harris from MIT's bioengineering department." Zoe nearly dropped the plates she was setting on the table. "Dr. Harris, the pioneering researcher in cardiac device miniaturization? That Dr. Harris?" Meryl nodded, clearly pleased by Zoe's reaction. "The very same. She's an old friend, and when I mentioned your interest in biomedical engineering and your cardiac monitoring project, she was intrigued." "But I'm just a high school student," Zoe protested, though her eyes shone with excitement. "My design is probably primitive compared to what she works with." "She doesn't see it that way," Meryl replied, opening the slim portfolio she'd brought. "I showed her your preliminary designs, hope you don't mind, and she was quite impressed with your innovative approach. She's especially interested in your focus on affordability and accessibility." The portfolio contained information about MIT's summer engineering program for exceptional high school students, a prestigious opportunity that normally required extensive applications and recommendations. "Dr. Harris can offer you direct admission to the program," Meryl explained. "It would mean intensive work 3 days a week through July and August, but it would also mean access to MIT's laboratories, resources, and mentorship." Zoe looked from the brochure to her grandmother, seeking permission, validation, and perhaps reassurance that this opportunity wouldn't disappear like a mirage. "It sounds perfect for you," Eliza said softly, "and the timing works well with your Science Center schedule." As they sat down to dinner, the conversation shifted to practical matters: transportation to MIT, program requirements, and scheduling. The ease with which they now discussed future plans marked a profound shift from the day-to-day survival mode that had consumed them for months. "I have news too," Eliza said as she served the simple but nourishing meal. "Dr. Patel has cleared me for part-time work starting next week, 20 hours to begin with, potentially increasing if my stamina continues to improve." "That's wonderful," Meryl responded warmly. "Have you found a position that interests you?" Eliza nodded, a hint of excitement in her eyes. "The community center near Zoe's school needs an administrative coordinator for their senior programs. The hours are flexible, the environment is low stress, and it's just 3 blocks from home." "Perfect location," Meryl noted approvingly. "And it sounds fulfilling." "It is," Eliza confirmed. "After a career in retail management, I'm looking forward to work that feels more directly meaningful." As they ate, Meryl shared updates about Emma, who was filming in Toronto but sent her regards. The conversation flowed naturally, touching on Zoe's STEM program projects, local news, and plans for the apartment's continued improvement. When Meryl eventually rose to leave, she handed Zoe the gift bag she'd brought. Just a small housewarming gift. Inside was a beautifully bound sketchbook and a set of professional-grade technical drawing pens. "For your designs," Meryl explained, "every brilliant idea deserves the proper tools to bring it to life." Zoe ran her fingers reverently over the quality materials. "Thank you for everything, not just these." Her voice caught slightly. "A month ago, I didn't know if we'd ever have a home again, let alone opportunities like MIT. You created those opportunities through your own persistence and talent," Meryl replied. "All I did was remove a few barriers." After Meryl departed, Zoe and Eliza stood together at their apartment window, watching as she entered a waiting car below. The evening light cast long shadows across their small but treasured domain, a space that represented not just physical shelter, but renewed possibility. "It's remarkable how much has changed in just a month," Eliza observed, her arm around her. "Granddaughter's shoulders. Not just our circumstances," Zoe agreed thoughtfully, "but how I see the future." Later that evening, as Zoe worked on refining her cardiac monitor design with her new professional pens, she found herself thinking about the chain of events that had led to this moment. The desperate courage it had taken to approach Meryl Streep had been born of necessity, yet that single action had catalyzed not just immediate relief, but a complete redirection of their lives. Her grandmother appeared in the doorway of her small bedroom, ready to say goodnight. Where once her face had been permanently etched with worry, now there was a peace that came from security, purpose, and improving health. "Excited about meeting Dr. Harris tomorrow?" Eliza asked. Zoe nodded, setting down her pen. "It doesn't seem real sometimes. A month ago we were invisible. Just another homeless family trying to survive winter. Now," she gestured to the design before her, the MIT brochure beside it. "Now we're rebuilding," Eliza completed the thought. "Not just surviving, but creating something new, and perhaps even better." As they embraced goodnight, both were acutely aware of the contrast between their current peace and the constant anxiety that had defined their lives in the car. The apartment was modest by any objective standard. Their financial situation still required careful management, and challenges certainly lay ahead. Yet something fundamental had shifted. A foundation had been established upon which they could build with their own efforts. The safety net created through Meryl and Emma's intervention had provided not just immediate rescue, but the stability required for self-sufficiency to take root once more. Outside their window, Boston continued its evening routine. The same city that had seemed so harsh during their months of homelessness, now appearing full of connections, opportunities, and possibilities waiting to be explored. Their new beginning had sprouted from a moment of desperation, but was now growing toward a future that neither grandmother nor granddaughter could have imagined on that cold night just 1 month before. 3 months had passed since the night outside the Wang Theatre. Summer sunshine streamed through the windows of the Queen's Park apartment, illuminating Zoe's workspace at the dining table. Spread before her were detailed technical drawings, a laptop displaying 3D modeling software, and a prototype circuit board that represented the physical manifestation of her cardiac monitoring concept. "I don't think I've seen you blink in 20 minutes, Emma Thompson observed from her position on the sofa, where she was reviewing a stack of papers. Zoe looked up with a sheepish smile, rolling her shoulders to release the tension of concentrated work. "Sorry, I get absorbed when I'm troubleshooting." "No apology necessary," Emma replied. "Focus is a gift, though perhaps a brief break might help, fresh perspectives and all that." Following through on Meryl's introduction, Dr. Eleanor Harris had indeed accepted Zoe into MIT's summer engineering program. 2 months into the prestigious opportunity, Zoe's cardiac monitoring project had evolved from a theoretical design into a working prototype under Dr. Harris's mentorship. Emma had volunteered to help Zoe prepare for her upcoming presentation to the program's faculty evaluation panel. "You're right," Zoe agreed, standing to stretch. "My eyes are crossing from staring at circuit schematics." As she moved to the kitchen for water, Zoe caught a glimpse of herself in the hallway mirror, a reflection that still occasionally surprised her. The hollow-cheeked, perpetually anxious girl from the car had transformed into someone with clear eyes, healthy color, and a posture that suggested growing confidence rather than defensive wariness. "Any word from your grandmother?" Emma asked, accepting the glass of water Zoe offered her. She texted during lunch break. "The senior center field trip to the museum is going well." Eliza had graduated from part-time administrative work to program coordinator at the community center, her natural organizational skills and empathetic nature making her exceptionally good with the seniors in her care. "She's still planning to be back in time for dinner with us." Emma nodded approvingly. "Meryl sends her regrets again. The film schedule in Chicago is apparently quite demanding." "We understand," Zoe assured her. "We're grateful you're here to help with my presentation." Though their support had evolved from daily involvement to weekly check-ins, either Meryl or Emma still made time to visit regularly. What had begun as emergency intervention had matured into something more nuanced, mentorship, that respected the growing stability and independence of both Zoe and Eliza, while maintaining genuine connection. "Speaking of your presentation," Emma said, turning to business, "your technical content is impeccable. Dr. Harris wouldn't have approved it otherwise. It's the narrative framework we need to refine." Zoe sat beside Emma, studying the notes she'd made on the presentation draft. You think I should address the personal motivation more directly? I do, Emma confirmed. Many brilliant engineering solutions exist in the world. What makes yours unique is the perspective from which it emerged. Watching your grandmother struggle with inadequate monitoring options during your months of housing insecurity. Zoe's expression grew thoughtful. I've been hesitant to emphasize that part of our story. It still feels exposing. Vulnerability can be powerful when channeled purposefully, Emma observed. You're not seeking pity. You're demonstrating how lived experience informed your design priorities. Affordability, simplicity, accessibility. This approach to their past hardship, neither hiding it in shame nor exploiting it for sympathy, had been one of the most valuable lessons Emma and Meryl had modeled. They had shown Zoe how to integrate difficult experiences into a coherent narrative that informed but didn't define her future. You're right, Zoe acknowledged. The whole reason my design uses smartphone integration instead of proprietary hardware is because I was thinking about patients who can't afford expensive, dedicated devices. Precisely, Emma agreed. That's not just good engineering, it's empathetic engineering. Don't shy away from that strength. As they worked through the presentation revisions, Zoe's phone chimed with a notification. It's Dr. Harris, she reported, quickly scanning the message. She's forwarded an email from MedTech Innovations. They want to discuss my project at the symposium next week. Emma's eyebrows rose. The medical device company? That's extraordinary. Zoe, they're especially interested in the low-cost monitoring approach for underserved communities, Zoe continued, her voice gaining excitement as she read. They have a foundation that focuses on health care accessibility. Well-deserved recognition, Emma declared warmly. Your project has real-world applications that extend far beyond an academic exercise. Their work continued through the afternoon, pausing only when Eliza returned from the community center, bringing with her the energy and stories accumulated during her day with the seniors. The apartment filled with conversation. As she prepared dinner, Zoe and Emma helping, while updating her on the presentation progress and the exciting medtech development. During their meal, Emma observed the comfortable dynamic between grandmother and granddaughter, the easy affection, the shared jokes, the mutual respect that had deepened through their hardships and recovery. Their apartment, though modest, had become a genuine home filled with purpose and possibility. I have news too, Eliza announced as they finished eating. The community center director has approved my proposal for a senior assistance program specifically focused on medical management. It's small to start, just 5 hours weekly, but it's something I feel uniquely qualified to coordinate given our experiences. That's wonderful, Grandma, Zoe responded enthusiastically. Will you incorporate some of the monitoring technology from my project? That's exactly what I was hoping, Eliza confirmed. Once your prototype is finalized, of course. After dinner, as sunset painted their small living room with golden light, Emma shared news from her own world. Upcoming film projects, Meryl's latest adventures in Chicago, mutual friends from the industry. Though their lives occupied vastly different spheres, these bridges of genuine connection had become treasured by all three women. Before leaving, Emma handed Zoe a thin envelope. A bit of advance planning, she explained. The National Youth Science Foundation is hosting their annual Congress in Washington next month. Meryl and I thought you might be interested in attending as a student delegate. Zoe opened the envelope to find an official invitation bearing her name. These selections are incredibly competitive. How did I even get nominated? Dr. Harris submitted your name and project details, Emma explained. Meryl and I merely mentioned to a few foundation board members that they might want to pay special attention to your application. Your work did the rest. After Emma's departure, Zoe and Eliza sat together on their small balcony, sharing the peaceful evening moment that had become their daily ritual. The contrast between their current life and where they had been just 3 months ago remained staggering. I never imagined this, Eliza admitted softly. When we lost the apartment, I thought I'd failed you completely, that your future was compromised beyond repair. I was scared too, Zoe acknowledged, not just about shelter or food, but about losing any chance at the education I needed. Eliza reached for her granddaughter's hand. Instead, you're presenting at MIT and being invited to national science congresses. Your parents would be so proud of your resilience. And yours, Zoe countered, from cardiac patient to program coordinator developing services for others with health challenges. That's an incredible journey, Grandma. As darkness settled over Boston, the city lights created a tapestry of possibility below their balcony. 3 months ago, those same lights had represented only inaccessible warmth as they huddled in their car. Now they symbolized connections, opportunities, and roads forward that continued to expand in unexpected directions. Their growing confidence wasn't merely about improved circumstances, though those certainly helped. It was about reclaiming their belief in their own capacities, Zoe's intellectual gifts, Eliza's organizational skills, their shared resilience, and directing those strengths toward not just rebuilding their own lives, but potentially improving others as well. The desperate plea for $500 had catalyzed a transformation neither could have imagined on that cold winter night, one measured not just in material stability, but in renewed purpose and expanding horizons. 6 months had passed since the fateful night outside the Wang Theatre. The Queen's Park apartment had acquired more personal touches, framed certificates from Zoe's MIT summer program, potted herbs thriving on Eliza's kitchen windowsill, and a professional drawing table where Zoe refined her increasingly sophisticated designs. But the most significant addition sat in the living room, a whiteboard covered with notes, diagrams, and timelines for what they had come to call the Housing Initiative. Meryl Streep studied the board with genuine interest, a cup of tea warming her hands on this crisp October afternoon. The concept has evolved significantly since you first mentioned it at your MIT presentation. Zoe nodded eagerly, gesturing to different sections of the board. Dr. Harris helped me refine the technological aspects, but Grandma's input on the social service integration has been crucial. What had begun as a passing comment during Zoe's MIT presentation about wanting to develop systems that could help families experiencing housing insecurity had crystallized over the past 3 months into a comprehensive proposal. The Housing Initiative combined Zoe's technology skills, Eliza's program coordination experience, and insights from their own lived experience to create a community-based approach to homelessness prevention. The early warning system is particularly innovative, Meryl observed, examining the diagram that showed how data analytics could identify families at risk before eviction occurred. Intervention before crisis is always more effective. That's precisely what we learned from our own situation, Eliza explained, joining them from the kitchen. If we'd had access to emergency assistance when I first got sick, we might never have lost our apartment. Their ability to discuss their past hardship without shame had developed gradually, another measure of their healing and growth. What had once been a source of embarrassment had transformed into valuable expertise they could leverage to help others. The Boston Community Foundation Board meets next week, Meryl reminded them. Are you ready for the presentation? Zoe glanced at her grandmother, a silent communication passing between them. We believe so, she answered. Emma's coaching on public speaking has been incredibly helpful. Through Meryl's careful networking, Zoe and Eliza had secured a coveted slot to present their housing initiative to the Foundation's grant committee. If approved, their project would receive a $50,000 pilot program grant, enough to launch a small-scale version in partnership with 2 local community centers. Speaking of Emma, Meryl said, checking her watch, she should be here shortly with Rebecca and our special guest. The special guest was Sophia Alvarez, the Foundation's program director, who had agreed to provide unofficial feedback on their presentation before the formal committee meeting. Emma had volunteered to pick her up, turning what could have been an intimidating professional consultation into a more comfortable gathering of supporters. When they arrived 30 minutes later, introductions were warm, but tinged with the nervousness that accompanied any important presentation. Sophia, however, quickly established an atmosphere of constructive collaboration rather than evaluation. Before we begin, she said, accepting the tea Eliza offered, I want to be clear that I'm already impressed with the concept outline I've reviewed. Today is about refinement, not judgment. As Zoe and Eliza walked Sophia through their full presentation, the months of preparation were evident in their polished delivery and thoughtful responses to questions. Where once they had been recipients of assistance, they now spoke with the authority of experts proposing solutions. The mentorship component is particularly strong, Sophia noted after they finished. Pairing families who've regained stability with those just entering crisis creates sustainable support beyond what any formal program can provide. That was Grandma's insight, Zoe acknowledged proudly. Her community center work showed her how valuable peer support can be. Eliza smiled, her confidence in professional settings having grown tremendously through her work at the senior center. When we were living in our car, the isolation was almost as difficult as the physical hardship. Having someone who understood and had navigated the same challenges would have meant everything. After Sophia offered her specific recommendations for the foundation presentation, the conversation shifted to broader implementation questions. The practical planning session continued through an informal dinner that Emma had thoughtfully arranged to be delivered, allowing the momentum to continue without interruption. As they concluded, Sophia's expression was one of genuine admiration. "What strikes me most about your initiative," she said, gathering her notes, "is how you've transformed personal tragedy into systemic innovation. That's remarkably rare." After Sophia departed with promises of continued support, Meryl, Emma, and Rebecca remained to help refine the presentation points that needed strengthening. The living room transformed into a workshop of ideas, with Zoe sketching quick revisions to diagrams, while Eliza adjusted program language based on feedback. "I have news that might add credibility to your proposal," Rebecca mentioned during a break. The cardiac monitoring prototype Zoe developed at MIT has received preliminary interest from 2 healthcare providers focusing on underserved communities. Zoe looked up from her sketching, genuine surprise on her face. "Really? Dr. Harris didn't mention anything. She wanted me to tell you personally," Meryl explained. "Mass Health is considering a pilot program to test your monitoring system with cardiac patients who have limited access to traditional healthcare facilities," Emma added, with characteristic directness. "Your design's emphasis on affordability and smartphone integration makes it particularly valuable for patients with economic constraints." The news represented another thread in the tapestry of possibility that had been weaving itself since that desperate night 6 months earlier. What had begun as a straightforward request for a STEM program fee had expanded into multiple pathways of innovation, education, and social impact. Later, after their visitors had departed, Zoe and Eliza stood together at their now familiar balcony, watching night settle over Boston. The city that had once seemed so hostile during their months of homelessness had become a landscape of opportunity and connection. "Sometimes I can hardly believe how much has changed," Eliza said softly. 6 months ago we were invisible, just another struggling family that society overlooked. And now we're developing programs that might help those same families," Zoe marveled. "It feels like we've come full circle." "Not quite a circle," Eliza corrected gently. "More like a spiral, returning to similar territory, but from a higher perspective." The wisdom of her observation settled between them as they watched the city lights below. Their journey from crisis to stability had never been about simply receiving help, but about building capacity to extend similar support to others. The next morning dawned clear and bright as Zoe prepared for her shift at the Science Center, where her role had expanded from student-docent to program developer for a new initiative encouraging girls in STEM fields. As she organized her materials, her phone chimed with a message from Meryl. "Just heard from the foundation. They've added 10 minutes to your presentation slot next week. Unprecedented for first-time applicants. They're taking your proposal very seriously. So proud of you both." Zoe shared the message with Eliza, who was preparing for her own workday at the senior center. The schedule on their refrigerator reflected their increasingly full but purposeful lives. Eliza's expanded program responsibilities, Zoe's science center shifts, their community volunteer commitments, and ongoing development of the housing initiative. "I was thinking," Eliza said as they prepared to leave, We should allocate a small portion of the grant funding, if we receive it, to establish an emergency scholarship fund for STEM program fees. For kids like me, Zoe realized immediately, understanding. So they don't have to stand in the cold and approach celebrities for help. Eliza nodded, her eyes reflecting both the pain of their past struggles and the determination that had emerged from them. Exactly. Let's make sure that fee is never a barrier between a talented student and the opportunity they deserve. As they walked together toward the bus stop that would take them to their respective destinations, their steps were purposeful and confident, no longer the hesitant movements of those uncertain of their place in the world. In 6 short months, they had journeyed from desperate survival to creating frameworks that might prevent others from experiencing similar hardships. Paying it forward wasn't just a nicety or an afterthought. It had become the central organizing principle of their rebuilt lives, the foundation upon which all other elements rested, the motivation that gave meaning to their incredible journey from that cold night outside the theater to this bright, autumn morning filled with purpose and possibility. 1 year had passed since the night outside the Wang Theater. Boston wore its autumn colors proudly, trees in the public garden blazing with red and gold as Zoe made final adjustments to the podium setup. The community center's main hall had been transformed for tonight's event. Rows of chairs arranged before a small stage, refreshment tables along one wall, and a display board showing the housing initiative's first-year achievements. Microphone. Check, Zoe spoke clearly, her voice carrying through the speakers with perfect clarity. No longer the desperate teenager from a year ago, she stood tall in a simple but professional outfit, her confidence evident in her posture and clear gaze. Sounds perfect, Emma Thompson called from the back row, giving a thumbs up. The acoustics in here are better than half the theaters I've performed in. Emma had arrived from London 2 days earlier to attend this milestone event, while Meryl was already in Boston filming her latest project. Their involvement with Zoe and Eliza had evolved over the months, becoming less about direct assistance and more about genuine mentorship and friendship. They remained connected not through obligation, but through mutual respect and shared purpose. Nervous? Emma asked, joining Zoe at the podium. A little, Zoe admitted. It's one thing to present to a foundation board. It's another to speak in front of people actually affected by our work. Tonight's event marked the official launch of the Housing Initiative's expanded program. The Boston Community Foundation had not only approved their initial grant request, but had doubled the funding after their pilot phase demonstrated promising results. Now they were scaling to serve 5 community centers across the city with potential for statewide expansion in the coming year. You'll be magnificent, Emma assured her. Just speak from experience as you've done from the beginning. The doors opened to admit Eliza, accompanied by Meryl and Rebecca. They carried boxes containing program materials for the evening. The press release went out an hour ago, Rebecca reported, setting down her box. Carefully worded exactly as you requested, focusing on the program itself rather than any celebrity involvement. This had been a deliberate choice from the beginning. While Meryl and Emma's support had been invaluable, all agreed that the housing initiative should stand on its own merits, rather than being perceived as a celebrity charity project. Their names appeared on advisory documents, but were intentionally minimized in public materials. The first families are arriving, Eliza noted, glancing toward the entrance where a volunteer greeted attendees. Her own transformation over the year was as remarkable as Zoe's. Healthy color in her cheeks, energy in her movements, purpose in her expression. The cardiac program at the community center had expanded under her leadership, incorporating Zoe's monitoring technology in a partnership with MassHealth. As the hall gradually filled, Zoe observed the diverse group gathering: foundation representatives, community center directors, healthcare workers, and most importantly, families currently participating in or graduated from the Housing Initiative's programs. These were the people who mattered most tonight, those whose lives had been touched by a system designed from first-hand understanding of their challenges. Precisely at 7, Eliza stepped to the podium to welcome everyone. Her opening remarks were brief but powerful, acknowledging the journey that had led to this moment without dwelling on past hardships. She introduced the community center directors and foundation representatives, thanking them for their partnership and trust. "And now," she concluded, "I'm honored to introduce someone who understands both the problem and our proposed solutions intimately. My granddaughter Zoe Morgan, Chief Architect of the Housing Initiative's technology platform." Applause filled the room as Zoe took her place at the podium. For a moment, her mind flashed back to that desperate night a year ago. The biting cold, the security guard moving to intercept her, the terrifying moment of stepping into Meryl Streep's path with nothing but hope and determination. 1 year ago, she began, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. "My grandmother and I were living in our car 3 blocks from here. Today, we're launching a program designed to ensure fewer families face that reality." She outlined the initiative's core components: early identification of at-risk households, a rapid intervention with appropriate resources, technology-assisted case management, and perhaps most importantly, the peer mentorship network that paired previously homeless families with those currently navigating the system. "The true experts on housing insecurity are those who have experienced it," Zoe emphasized. "Our program succeeds because it centers those voices and experiences in every aspect of its design." As she spoke, slides displayed the initiative's preliminary impact data. 27 families prevented from losing housing in the pilot phase, 35 connected with sustainable assistance programs, 18 placed in emergency transition apartments while permanent solutions were secured. "Behind every number is a family with their own story," Zoe reminded the audience. "The technology and systems matter, but ultimately this work is about people, their dignity, their potential, their futures." When she concluded her presentation, the applause was warm and genuine. But what followed meant even more: families stepping forward to share brief testimonials about how the initiative had impacted their lives. A single father who had kept his apartment thanks to the emergency rental assistance. A mother whose children had maintained school stability during a medical crisis. A grandmother raising grandchildren, much like Eliza, who had found both practical support and emotional understanding through the peer network. As the formal program transitioned to refreshments and networking, Zoe found herself approached by a woman in her 30s, professional in appearance, but with the lingering watchfulness that Zoe recognized from her own months of housing insecurity. "Your monitoring system changed my mother's life," the woman said without preamble. "She's one of the mass health pilot participants. Being able to track her heart condition from her phone instead of missing work for constant clinic visits has meant she can keep her job, her apartment, her independence." Zoe was momentarily speechless, the real-world impact of her work suddenly concrete and personal. That's exactly why we designed it that way," she finally managed. "Well, it works," the woman affirmed simply before moving on. Later, as the event wound down, Zoe found herself standing with Eliza, Meryl, and Emma in a quiet corner of the hall. "1 year ago tonight," Meryl observed softly, "we were heading to a very different venue." "The Wang Theatre," Zoe nodded, remembering. "I was so terrified, but even more desperate." "You were brave," Emma corrected. "There's a difference." Eliza reached for her granddaughter's hand. "If you hadn't found that courage, where would we be now?" The question hung in the air, impossible to answer definitively, yet haunting in its implications. Not just for them personally, but for the dozens of families who had benefited from the initiative, born from that desperate moment. "I've been thinking about that night," Zoe said thoughtfully. "About how you could have just given me the $500 and felt good about helping, but instead you asked questions, you looked deeper." "Most people in crisis need more than a single intervention," Meryl replied. "They need systems that work, connections, that last, opportunities to rebuild, which is exactly what the Housing Initiative provides," Emma added with evident pride. "You've created something remarkable, both of you." As they prepared to leave, the community center director approached with an unexpected request. A young reporter from the local paper was hoping for a brief comment from Meryl and Emma about their involvement with the initiative. "Just a quick quote for context," the director explained. "They've been respectful of your request to keep the focus on the program itself." Meryl and Emma exchanged glances, then nodded their assent. The young reporter approached somewhat nervously, clearly trying to maintain professional composure, despite interviewing two legendary actresses. "I understand you've been involved with the housing initiative from its earliest stages," she began. "Would you share what drew you to this particular project?" Emma looked to Meryl, who answered with careful consideration. "Sometimes extraordinary solutions emerge from the most unexpected encounters. What Zoe and Eliza have built isn't about charity. It's about systemic change designed by those who understand the problems intimately. Our involvement has been a privilege, not a favor." The reporter turned to Emma, who added with characteristic directness, "The true story here isn't about celebrity involvement. It's about what happens when society actually listens to those with lived experience of its failures, then empowers them to create solutions. That's what makes the housing initiative different and effective." As they finally left the community center, stepping into the crisp autumn evening, Zoe realized they had indeed come full circle, returning to questions of housing security, dignity, and opportunity, but from an entirely transformed position. What had begun with a desperate plea for $500 had catalyzed not just personal recovery, but a ripple effect touching dozens of families and potentially many more in the years ahead. The circle had closed, but like Eliza had wisely observed months earlier, it was really more of a spiral, returning to the same issues but from a higher vantage point, with greater resources, deeper understanding, and the power to effect real change. 5 years had passed since the night outside the Wang Theatre. The modest Queen's Park apartment had long since been replaced by a comfortable townhouse that Zoe and Eliza had purchased together, a permanent symbol of their journey from homelessness to stability. On this bright spring morning, Zoe stood in the living room surrounded by packed boxes, her MIT engineering diploma hanging prominently on the wall beside framed photographs documenting their remarkable journey. "Are you sure you've got everything?" Eliza asked, entering with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. At 71, she remained vibrant and engaged, her heart condition well managed through the very monitoring system her granddaughter had pioneered. "I think so," Zoe replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. At 21, she had blossomed into a poised young woman whose confidence and composure gave little hint of the desperate teenager she had once been. "The apartment in Cambridge is furnished, and MedTech is shipping my equipment directly to the lab." Today marked a significant transition, Zoe's official start as Director of Accessible Technology at MedTech Innovations, the company that had first expressed interest in her cardiac monitoring system during her MIT summer program 5 years earlier. Her undergraduate research had expanded into a comprehensive platform for affordable medical monitoring, earning her both academic accolades and industry attention. "The car should be here in about an hour," Zoe noted, checking her watch. "Meryl insisted on sending it, even though I told her I could just take the train." Eliza smiled knowingly. "Some things haven't changed. She still enjoys making certain arrangements herself." Their relationship with Meryl Streep and Emma Thompson had evolved over the years into something unique. Neither the intense support of those early months nor a typical friendship between equals, but a genuine connection maintained through significant life moments and shared purpose. Though their daily lives rarely intersected due to geography and schedules, the bonds formed during that pivotal year had remained remarkably durable. A knock at the door announced Rebecca's arrival. Though no longer Meryl's assistant, having started her own event management company 3 years earlier, she remained connected to their extended circle. "Perfect timing," Eliza greeted her warmly. "Coffee?" "I'd love some," Rebecca replied, setting down her briefcase. "I have all the final preparations for tonight's foundation gala. Everything's in place." The housing initiative had grown beyond anyone's initial expectations. What had begun as a small pilot serving a few dozen families in Boston had expanded to a statewide program with national recognition. Tonight's 5th anniversary gala would celebrate not just past achievements, but the launch of a significant expansion, the initiative's model being adopted by 3 additional states with federal grant support. "Eliza, your speaking slot is confirmed for 8:15 following the governor," Rebecca continued, reviewing her notes. "Zoe, You'll introduce the new technology platform at 8:30. Then Meryl and Emma will join you both for the panel discussion at 8:45. Zoe nodded, making mental notes. Despite years of public speaking, the significance of tonight's event still triggered butterflies. Has the White House confirmed their representative? The Housing Secretary will attend personally, Rebecca confirmed. Your policy brief made quite an impression. After reviewing the remaining details, Rebecca departed to oversee final venue preparations. Left alone, grandmother and granddaughter shared a moment of reflection, surrounded by the physical evidence of their journey, packed boxes ready for Zoe's next chapter, awards for their community work, the housing initiative's latest impact, report showing thousands of families served. I had a call from Lisa Chen yesterday, Eliza mentioned, referring to a woman they had helped during the initiative's first year. Her daughter just got accepted to Boston University with a full scholarship. She's planning to study social work. Zoe smiled, genuinely moved. That's wonderful. She was, 13 when they came into the program? 12, Eliza confirmed. They were 3 days from eviction when our early warning system flagged their case. These ripple effects, lives stabilized, potentials preserved, futures reclaimed, had become the most meaningful measure of their work. Behind every statistic in their impact reports were families like Lisa's, whose trajectories had been altered through timely intervention and sustained support. Later, as Zoe placed the last few personal items in her weekend bag, her phone chimed, with a FaceTime call from Emma Thompson. There's our brilliant engineer, Emma greeted when Zoe answered. All packed for the big move? Just about, Zoe confirmed, turning the camera to show the boxes. Though technically it's not a move since I'll still be here most weekends. Sensible arrangement, Emma approved. Especially with the initiative's expansion requiring Eliza's experienced oversight. They chatted briefly about the evening's plans before Emma's expression grew more serious. I've been thinking about that night, 5 years ago today, if I'm not mistaken. You're not, Zoe confirmed softly. I've been thinking about it too. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found the courage to approach Meryl, or if she hadn't stopped to truly listen? The question invited a counterfactual that Zoe had considered many times over the years. I do, she admitted. Not just for us, but for all the families the initiative has helped since. That's the remarkable thing about certain moments, Emma observed thoughtfully. They create divergent paths with consequences beyond what anyone could predict. After the call ended, Zoe joined Eliza on their small back patio, where spring flowers bloomed in carefully tended beds, another symbol of their permanence and stability. I've been meaning to ask, Eliza said as they enjoyed the morning sunshine. Have you decided what you're going to say tonight about how it all began? 5 years had given them perspective on sharing their story. While never exploiting their past hardship for sympathy, they had learned the power of strategic vulnerability, how their lived experience lent credibility and authenticity to their work. I think it's time to tell the full story, Zoe decided. Not just about approaching Meryl for $500, but about what that moment represents, how systems fail, how desperate measures become necessary, and how proper intervention can change everything. The car arrived precisely on schedule, driven by a discreet professional service Meryl had used for years. As they loaded Zoe's bags, Eliza embraced her granddaughter with the perfect balance of holding close and letting go that she had mastered through their journey together. I'm so proud of you, she said simply. Not just for your achievements, but for who you've become through all of this. That evening, the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Copley Plaza glittered with dignitaries, foundation representatives, and program partners gathered to celebrate the housing initiative's remarkable journey. On a wall near the entrance, a timeline display chronicled its evolution from concept to nationally recognized model, beginning with a simple photograph, Zoe and Eliza standing outside their first apartment building, Meryl and Emma flanking them with supportive smiles. When the time came for Zoe's presentation, she approached the podium with the confidence of someone who had earned her place in this distinguished gathering. The audience quieted immediately, drawn by her presence and the compelling journey she represented. 5 years ago tonight, she began, her voice clear and strong. I stood outside the Wang Theatre in the bitter cold, gathering courage to ask a stranger for $500. She paused, letting the stark simplicity of that beginning resonate through the elegantly appointed ballroom. That moment could have gone many ways. Security could have removed me. My request could have been refused or fulfilled with a quick transaction and nothing more. Instead, it became the catalyst for everything we celebrate tonight. As she continued, her address, weaving personal experience with program data and policy implications, the underlying message remained clear: how individual actions, systems of support, and sustained commitment could transform not just isolated circumstances, but expand into lasting change that rippled outward through communities and lives. In the audience, Meryl and Emma listened with evident pride, no longer the benefactors of a desperate teenager, but partners in a mission that had grown beyond any of their initial expectations. Beside them sat Eliza, the health crisis that had precipitated their housing emergency, now a managed condition, and the wisdom gained through their journey, now benefiting countless other families. The lasting impact of that night wasn't just in what changed for my grandmother and me, Zoe concluded. It's in the model of intervention it inspired, comprehensive, dignified, and transformative. As we expand this model nationally, we carry forward a simple truth. Sometimes the most powerful solutions emerge from the most desperate moments, if we have the courage to ask for what we need, and the compassion to truly listen when asked. As applause filled the ballroom, Zoe knew that she had come more than full circle. The spiral had continued its upward trajectory, bringing her to heights unimaginable on that cold night 5 years earlier. Not just personal success, but the profound satisfaction of creating systems that might prevent others from ever needing to make the desperate plea that had changed her life.